There are always more bulletin bloopers to share. There's an inexhaustible list of those. And for those of you who don't know what bulletin bloopers are, the actual announcements that appear in church bulletins, okay? This one is Barbara, this is in a church bulletin somewhere. Barbara remains in the hospital and is still ill. She's also having trouble sleeping and requests tapes of the pastor's sermons. Diana and Don request your presence at their wedding. Presents. Women's luncheon. Each member bring a sandwich. Polly Phillips will give the medication. And finally, Irving Benson and Jessie Carter were married on October 24th at the church. So ends a friendship that began in their school days. You know, in 2016, a Chinese dissident named Harry Wu died. Now, what is the significance of his death for our purposes this morning? Mr. Wu had courage, not just a little bit of it, but an enormous amount of it. He had the courage to say what others wouldn't say. For most of the last half of the 20th century, Harry Wu made it a habit to resist the Communist Party's ruthless efforts to prevent democracy from gaining a foothold in China. When he decided to skip communist propaganda and indoctrination classes to be with his girlfriend, Mr. Wu was sentenced to hard labor in a Chinese prison labor camp. A faithful Christian, Catholic himself, he was told that he had to recant his religious beliefs or pay the price. He refused. At the camp, in order to survive, according to The Economist magazine, he learned how to dig into rat holes to find stores of grain so he wouldn't starve to death. He would often be left to eat half-rotten roots of cabbage left in the ground. He worked on farms and down in the coal mines where his back was broken. While comrades died around him, he reflected that their lives were just a flick of a cigarette ash in the wind. When he was finally released after 19 years at the prison camp, he received an invitation from an American professor to lecture at the University of California. So in 1985, with just $40 in his pocket and a part-time job at a donut shop, he arrived in America and eventually became an American citizen. Mr. Wu had courage, not just courage to speak his mind, but courage to pay the price for it. A profile in courage. Gideon, in our Old Testament readings read so well by Mickey and Rich, was another person unafraid to do what he thought necessary in order to preserve the ideals he cherished. When the invading Midianites overran central Palestine in search of food and water and plunder, many of the Israelites took cover in mountain caves and dens. To preserve his father's scant crop from the invaders, Gideon threshed the grain secretly in a wine press with a hand flail. Such intolerable and unacceptable conditions aroused in Gideon a social concern for his own people, and therefore a mobilization of Israeli troops to defeat the Midianites. When Gideon, as you heard, had reduced the number of troops down to 10,000, the Lord told him that was too many to be effective. Take your men, as we heard this morning, take your men down to the river and test them. The ones who get down on their knees and scoop the water with their hands, those are the ones you don't want. But the ones who lap the water with their tongues, like a dog would, those are the ones you want. And so out of 10,000, only 300 eventually lapped with their tongues, and they were the ones Gideon led into battle to defeat the Midianites. Gideon's public spirit, his daring, his modesty, his good temper, made him a brilliant personality. Some say the most remarkable military leader in the Old Testament. Gideon, a profile in courage. James, the brother of Jesus, a Galilean villager who angered many people in Jerusalem with his testimonies about the saving grace of Christ. To the followers of Jesus, James was the living blood link to the Messiah. James not only had the courage to speak his mind, he also had the courage to pay the price for it. Historians tell us that James was so radical in his belief and in his conviction that even his enemies respected him. But when he was told by the religious elite to climb to the top, as historians tell us, to climb to the top of the pinnacle of the Jerusalem temple and recant his beliefs, James did exactly the opposite. And he espoused the salvation of his brother Jesus, angering his detractors and his enemies even more, who then, as the story goes, pushed him off the top of the temple. It still wasn't enough to kill him. So they finished the job by stoning him to death. James, the brother of Jesus. And what did James say in the beginning of his letter read by Mickey this morning? My brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy, because you know the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its full effect so that you may mature and be complete. James, a profile in courage. Now, what's the thread that connects these three together? Harry Wu, Gideon, James, the brother of Jesus. Well, courage, of course. You see, there was a faith from within that drove these men to do what they did. Mr. Wu said he didn't want to be known as a hero. He just wanted to be known as a survivor. After the beatings, the broken bones, the humiliation for refusing to deny his Christian faith and his political viewpoints, he said after being released from the Chinese prison camp, not only did I survive hell, but I came to a free country, America, and I became a free man again. When James, the brother of Jesus, got pushed off the pinnacle of the Jerusalem temple and then was stoned to death by the mob, there was a faith within him that drove him to say what he said. As Harry Wu's faith demanded freedom, not just for himself, but for others too, so did James long for the same thing, not for himself, but for others too. To James, Christ equaled freedom. When Gideon led the people into battle, he'd already learned from many lessons as a child that God was a just God. God was a fair God, and that any trampling upon other people's freedom was not to be tolerated. Therefore, at the end, he said, when urged by his people after defeating the Midianites to rule over them, he said, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you, but the Lord will rule over you. Profiles in courage. President Andrew Jackson once said, one man with courage makes a majority. Now, when we bring this down to a personal level and the examination of the degree of courage that we think we have within ourselves, we can give it one simple test with one simple question. Over the course of my lifetime, how many times have I done something or said something that cost me and I had to pay the price for it? It could be something as simple as making a large financial investment in a very, very fine humanitarian cause, understanding that the dollars that you have given up could have given you more security in your retirement. Or it could have been standing behind a social or a religious concern that was widely unpopular with many people, including your own friends. Or it might have been a risk taken to promote a new idea or to promote a new venture that cost you and diminished your own personal security. Or in the wake of tragedy or great loss, the courage of faith within you will be summoned to support those who feel and share the same loss. Several years ago, when I delivered a baccalaureate address at Monmouth College in Western Illinois, I told the students that they would need courage for the course ahead. Like the skier who takes the lift to the top of the most advanced run on the mountain, he can see the run in front of him. No matter the moguls or the level of steepness, he still pushes off. Not only does he have the ability, but he has the courage. I said to the students that the course will not be easy as you strive to carve out your own destiny and your own identity in the coming years. The world will try its best to define you in worldly terms. What kind of position you have, how successful you are, in which neighborhood you live, your friends with whom you associate, the clothes you wear, the cars you drive. The temptation to accumulate much will be great. Temptation to conform will be even greater. But Paul tells us in the book of Romans, do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewal of your own mind. In other words, submit yourself to the will of God and not to the will of your peers. Create your own profile of courage. The American theologian Paul Tillich said in the courageous standing of uncertainty, faith shows most visibly its dynamic character. Former governor of Massachusetts and former presidential candidate Mitt Romney said in a commencement address several years ago, Christianity is not the faith of the complacent. It is not the faith of the comfortable. It is not the faith of the timid. It demands and creates heroic souls. In 1955, when President John Kennedy was then United States Senator from Massachusetts, he wrote a book called Profiles in Courage. The book said that he chose 8 of his historical colleagues for their acts of courageous integrity in the face of overwhelming opposition, including the likes of John Quincy Adams, Daniel Webster, Sam Houston, and Robert A. Taft. President Kennedy himself was awarded the Navy Marine Corps Medal, some of you know this already, for his bravery in saving fellow crew members when his PT-109 boat was torpedoed during the Second World War near the Solomon Islands in the Pacific. But he said in his book about courage, to be courageous requires no exceptional qualifications. It requires no magic formula, no special combination of time, place, and circumstance. It is an opportunity that sooner or later is presented to us all. In whatever arena of life one may meet the challenge of courage, whatever may be the sacrifices he faces if he follows his conscience, the loss of friends, his fortune, his contentment, even the esteem of his fellow person. Each person must decide for himself the course he will follow. The stories of past courage can define that ingredient. They can teach, they can offer hope, they can provide inspiration, but they cannot supply courage itself. For this, each person must look into his own soul. Our Presbyterian book, Confessions, sums it up in no uncertain terms in one sentence. Life is a gift to be received with gratitude and a task to be pursued with courage.